Well, it's good to be back with you. I think it's almost a year ago I was here to install Laurel, and it's just always such a joy to worship in MCC congregations, and particularly at these significant milestone moments, like affirming and saying yes to this call to ministry. The passage from John, "Come and see, follow me," is a good passage, I think, for a licensing toward ordination service. A common theme in the Gospel of John is this theme of seeing, but it isn't the physical seeing that we do with our eyes, but the seeing that leads to understanding. It's the seeing with the mind or the heart, the kind of seeing that has us go, "Oh, now I get it," or "Aha, oh, that's great," right? It's that moment of knowing, understanding that goes with encountering someone or something new. In this text, we have the lovely interplay between the seeing one does with the eyes, the seeing that is knowing, and the admission from John that he didn't know Jesus. Kind of like dropping everything. This guy comes and follows. That's a great, I'll remember that, how Jesus called people. Yeah. Seeing and knowing, they're connected. We can't know something or someone unless we've seen them, encountered them, met them. But the mere act of seeing with our eyes doesn't necessarily lead to knowing or understanding. Most of us probably have experienced a time when we've got it wrong, when we jumped to the wrong conclusion because we thought we saw something and understood what was happening or what was going on. We thought there are times when we assume that in seeing we know and understand, or that we are able to see everything that is happening. Twice John says that he did not know Jesus. In fact, it almost sounds like he baptized Jesus first, not knowing who he was. And this text doesn't seem to recognize that they're cousins, which is interesting. But when the Spirit descended on Jesus like a dove and remained on Jesus, it was then that he knew who Jesus was. John saw Jesus with his eyes when Jesus came to be baptized, and in the process of baptizing Jesus, John then knew him. Once Jesus' identity was confirmed to John, John then witnessed to who Jesus was. Or maybe his cousin, he's like, "Well, I know Jesus, but I didn't actually know who he was." This passage also includes a number of back and forth questions between Jesus and the disciples. What are you looking for? Where are you staying? These are the kinds of questions we ask of each other, the kinds of questions that help us to get to know someone else. They don't tell us everything about the person, but they're a point of connection. They're a way to make a connection and start a conversation to understand and learn more. Holding what we know and what we don't know with open hands, asking questions of intent and curiosity, questions that connect. These are key to how we make friends, and these are key to healthy relationships. The verbs in this passage are also noticeable. Coming, declared, baptizing, descending, remaining, have seen, have testified, standing, watched, heard, followed, turned, saw, found, brought, looked. I find it helpful to list the verbs in biblical passages. It's quite telling. And then if we add the subject or the object of the verb, who was doing the action, or to whom was the action done, or the preposition, these become quite powerful. John saw Jesus coming toward him. I saw the Spirit descending from heaven, and the Spirit remained on him. John was standing with the two disciples. John watched Jesus walk by. The two disciples followed Jesus. Jesus turned and saw them. The disciples came and saw. Andrew found his brother, Simon Peter. Andrew brought Simon Peter to Jesus, who looked at him. Listing the verbs, noting the questions, this invites us to place ourselves in the text. What must it have been like to be John the Baptist, who saw the Spirit descend on Jesus and remain on him? What must it have been like for the disciples to have Jesus turn and see them? What is it like for us to have Jesus see us? And then to have Jesus ask us, what are you looking for? What question would we ask of Jesus in return? Have you ever been brought to Jesus? Did Jesus look at you? What was that like? Ideally, we'd end here and you would ponder these questions. These are great questions for prayer and conversation with Jesus. Biblical stories like this invite us in. They invite us to enter in, to immerse ourselves in the story and have it connect with our own story, to have the Bible read us, as it were, even as we are reading the Bible. It's easy to put distance between biblical stories and our own story because we say, well, it was so long ago, the context was so different, the time was different, we don't understand the culture of these stories. And yet, when we look at the text through particular words, like the verbs, we recognize that these are words that are part of our everyday lives. We watch, we declare, we follow, we hear, we see, we look. We bring and we are brought. We find and we are found. We turn and we're turned toward. When seen this way, the distance isn't so great between this biblical story and our own lives and stories. As I think about ministry and this story, these verbs, and these are the verbs of ministry. In ministry, we come, declare, baptize, remain, see, testify, stand, watch, hear, follow, turn, find, bring. Sometimes we're brought. We look. We can add the prepositions to enhance the meaning of ministry. We remain with, we stand with, or we stand before. We turn toward and sometimes turn around. We look with and we look for. These are verbs that apply to pastors, certainly, and they're verbs that apply to the congregation. In ministry, there is give and take. There is giving and receiving. There's a time to hear and a time to see, a time for the pastor to hear and see, a time for the congregation to testify and declare, time for the pastor to follow, for the congregation to be found. We journey together in mutuality and respect, trusting that the Spirit which descended as a dove from heaven and remained on Jesus is also descending and remaining and present with us. We tend to look to Jesus as the model for how to live, and so we should. As Christians and Mennonites, Jesus is the center of all that we believe and do. John the Baptist is also a model for us. One commentator referenced that we often ask, what would Jesus do? when in actuality we should and could be asking, what would John the Baptist do? For John was a witness to Jesus. He testified to what he had seen and experienced, and he testified to who Jesus was. Look, here is the Lamb of God. He pointed others to Jesus. He had his own followers, those who went to the desert seeking him to be baptized, and he readily directed them to follow Jesus. His ministry centered on testifying and witnessing so that others would follow Jesus. We too want to follow Jesus and do what Jesus did, and we want others to follow Jesus and do what Jesus did. We want to be sure that in the following and the doing, we are pointing others to Jesus, just as John the Baptist did. We follow Jesus knowing that we do so imperfectly, that as disciples of Jesus, we are always on the way and we will get it wrong. We will have times when we get it right, and we can offer praise and thanksgiving for that, but there are probably more times when we get it wrong. We are always on the way. Our lives of faith and practice are imperfect. We are in process. God isn't finished with us yet. We see and know, and we do so imperfectly. We live life humbly, relying on the grace of God and the graciousness of others. Part of the life of faith, and I think part of what this story invites us to, is that there are things that we see and know, and there are things that we don't see and we don't know, and we don't always know what it is that we don't know. We are invited to hold this lightly and tenderly, to hold what we know and what we don't know, and recognize that in the places where we don't know, God is at work, and it's the place of mystery that allows God to work and move within us in ways that we don't know and don't always see or understand. But the place of unknowing is the place of mystery where God dwells. As I thought about the seeing and what is seen and what is unseen, I was struck by some images from nature, and particularly thinking, we're focused at MCEC on next weekend in Leamington, annual church gathering. Everything we're doing in the office is all about ACG next week. So I'm kind of consumed by ACG and remembering last year, and at Rockway, one of the images that we're using, and if you're coming, you'll see it again, is the image of the aspen forest to illustrate who we as MCEC are as a regional church. We also use the image of the butterfly as sort of our strategic plan taking flight. So while what we see is inspiring and challenging, it is, for me, what we see in terms of the aspen forest and the butterflies inspiring. What I find really intriguing is what's happening underneath in the places where we can't see. So the aspen tree. Aspen trees are tall, white bark. They grow in clusters called stands or groups. They have vibrant yellow leaves in fall and are often called quaking aspens because of the sound of their leaves. Aspens dot the edge of conifer forests in clusters or clones. One aspen tree is actually one small part of a larger organism. A standard group of aspen trees is considered one singular organism, with the main life force underground in the extensive root system. Before a single aspen trunk appears above ground, the root system may lie dormant for many years until the conditions are just right, including sufficient sunlight. In a single stand, or clone, or forest, each tree is a genetic replication of the other trees, hence the name of clone for aspens to describe this forest or cluster. Even if the trees of a stand are wiped out, it's very difficult to permanently extinguish an aspen's root system due to the rapid rate which it reproduces, which one could, talk about the whole hopeful place for the church. This is a hopeful image for the church. The root which we can say is Christ cannot be destroyed, even if individual trees or a whole forest disappears, the root system is there. But what happens underground is actually pretty inspiring and hopeful. Likewise, with the butterfly, starts out as a caterpillar, and then it encloses itself in a cocoon. And the period of being in the cocoon requires the caterpillar to liquefy, melt, digest. You can use any of those words. The very act of what it's doing there, of liquefying, is the same as digesting the food of a larva. So what the caterpillar used to digest its food, it now uses to break down its own body into cells. These cells are called imaginal cells. Does that get your imagination going? Imaginal cells are undifferentiated cells, which means they can become anything. They can become any type of cell. And those imaginal cells reconfigure themselves and become a butterfly that breaks free from the cocoon and flies. What happens in the cocoon, what happens underground, is hopeful and inspiring, and it intrigues me. We don't see it, we don't get to be witnesses to that very act, but we get to see the before in terms of the caterpillar and the cocoon. And we get to see the after, the butterfly. We get to see the trees that are standing above the ground, but not the roots. This is powerful images for the church in this time and place. They're intriguing, mysterious, inspiring, and hopeful. They're also challenging. I mean, you have to liquefy yourself. You have to disintegrate, let go of yourself to become something new. We have an equally inspiring image for next week. If you want to come in here, I'll let you know it's the firefly. So these images, I think, also invite us to recognize that there's a lot that happens that's invisible to the eye. We aren't witnesses to this amazing transformation and growth, and yet we're witnesses to what happens when the caterpillar gives itself over to the process of melting or liquefying. We see the beauty. We're witnesses to the aspen forest, whose trees are all connected to the same root system, distinct and yet unified. We hold with awe and humility what we can see and know, and what we do not see and do not yet know. You've known each other as pastor and congregation for about a year. The early stages of ministry, I imagine, have invited lots of conversation and reflection on what is known and what isn't known. You've asked questions about who are you, what do you do, what does this look like, what do you bring to get to know each other. There's much that is known and not known in this journey of pastor and congregation. There's much that is known and not known about ministry, pastoral identity and tasks, and about the congregation. You are still in process and on this journey. While we are in process throughout our whole lives, the beginning of ministry is mostly about being in process. Variations on questions like, what are you looking for? Where are you staying? Help keep conversations open and curious. So keep asking these questions. I doubt that you've gotten to know the extent of each other in this first year. Paying attention to the verbs of ministry, coming toward, testifying to, witnessing, turning and seeing, standing with and watching, descending and remaining, following, finding and bringing. These help keep us oriented to the mission and ministry and vision of the Christian life and congregational life, as well as help to tend this relationship between pastor and congregation, and this journey towards ordination. The ministry and mission of the church is a shared journey where pastor and congregation testify and witness to the presence of Christ and the Holy Spirit in their midst. At times, the pastor helps the congregation to recognize how and where God is being revealed. At other times, the congregation reveals to the pastor how and where God is at work. There's mutual give and take, and the willingness to engage each other in asking questions of Jesus and responding to Jesus' questions to us. There's mutual trust that regardless of what everyone sees and knows, God is at work in all of us, in each of us, in every one of us, transforming us into the people that God calls us to be. May the one on whom the Spirit descended and remained abide with each of you, infusing your ministry and mission with wisdom, insight, and peace. Let it be so. We want to move into the litany of licensing toward ordination. You have a great description of what we're doing in the bulletin this morning. This is one step. Maybe it's the second step on a journey. So the first step is saying yes to the call and being installed as pastor. And the last year was testing and doing some initial testing of these gifts for ministry. And today we're doing a licensing toward ordination, which followed an interview with the representatives from Leadership Council, who then said, yes, there's been good discernment. We want to license Laurel towards ordination. And affirmation came from the congregation. And so we see this as, the Spirit moves. So we can't have a strict timeline, but we sort of say maybe, it's about a 2-year journey to begin to embody some of the things that we noted for growth in ministry, which we all have areas of growth. We're all, remember, still in process. So there's areas of growth. So let's live into those areas of growth, being part of TIM, having a mentor are parts of what this new ministry, the supports for it. This is a conversation and a discernment, a mutual conversation and discernment between Laurel and you as the congregation, to say how are Laurel's gifts being revealed more fully? Where are her strengths in ministry? Are we discerning that God is calling Laurel and that her gifts extend beyond this time and this congregation to the church at large? So that's the distinction between licensing toward ordination and ordination, is that licensing toward ordination is for this congregation, this time, this place. Licensing toward ordination goes with you to another congregation. Gifts are not only for community Drayton, but also for the whole church. So that's what we're doing. I invite Laurel to come forward.